I'm Lisa Parenteau, and I'd like to welcome you to Lifting Others as We Rise, the podcast where we dive into the world of real estate and the power of positive thinking. In each episode, we're going to bring you inspiring conversations with real estate professionals and other thought leaders who have really harnessed the power of lifting others up along their journeys. So let's get ready to elevate our mindset. Lifting Others as We Rise podcast, where inspiration is a catalyst for action. Let's go. Welcome to Lifting Others as We Rise podcast. I am your host, Lisa Parenteau, realtor, team leader, CRS, broker associate, but most importantly, Glamma to Eloise Ann, who is 5, and Hazel, who is just about 6 months, and baby Navy Grace, who's due in 1 month. That certainly is my most favorite job here on beautiful Cape Cod. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this episode of the podcast. I know you're going to enjoy today's episode. I can't wait to meet with our guest and learn more about his journey and what brings him here to us today. So wherever you are, settle in, grab a cup of coffee or whatever you're doing. If you're at the gym, make sure your headphones are in correctly and join us. It's my intention, as always, to discover inspiration and catalysts for change in the stories of real estate professionals across the country. Today, my very special guest is Gabe Leibowitz. And Gabe, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Gabe.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah, Gabe is a seasoned New York City real estate professional, which in and of itself is amazing because it's a little bit like the Wild West in New York City, very different than most of our markets for sure. He's been in real estate for close to 20 years, and he is known for his integrity, professionalism, and his client-focused approach. After founding and running his own brokerage for about 10 years, he became a top producing agent at Warburg Realty before joining Douglas Elliman. So currently he's with Elliman in New York City, which in and of itself is quite glamorous and quite interesting. I'm sure he has stories to tell and share with us about that as well in Tribeca. So one of the things that I've noticed is your commitment to the care and precision that you take with your clients. I've looked at some of your social media and some of your stuff, and I really, I would suspect from a DISC personality profile, you may be a high C. I'm not sure. You would have to let me know that. But I get the sense that there's a real precision and accuracy and kind of data-driven piece to what you do as well. I know you have a business degree from NYU, so maybe that contributes to that as well. But Gabe, welcome. I'd love to hear you introduce yourself a little bit, and then let's just dig right into the podcast.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Linda. Yeah, you covered a lot of my career trajectory. I'm a true native New Yorker. I was born and raised here. I went to college at Brandeis in Massachusetts. That was my only time out of New York for any of my adult life. And, it's funny you brought up the precision sort of based approach because I have ADHD, pretty bad, intense. I'm not going to say bad because I think it's actually a superpower if you harness it. But ADHD, I have intense ADHD. And so the only way I found I was able to do my job, which of course doesn't have a boss, doesn't have somebody staring over your shoulder telling you what to do, right? You've simply got to be organized yourself. And so I created all these sort of OCD-ish systems to sort of balance it out. And so sort of in a roundabout way, you were sort of right on point that my approach, really does have a lot of that to it because I absolutely need it to be able to stay organized and, really give my clients the best service that I can.
Well, I love that because I'm actually just working on an online course on using DISC for working with luxury clients. And one of the things is so often people assume realtors are high I, very chatty, love the, networking scene and whatever. But there is an enormous number of realtors who are like you, very precision and data driven. And there are a lot of clients that breathe a deep sigh of relief when they meet a realtor like
I should clarify that, I wouldn't say I'm a networking event kind of person. That's a little manufactured for my approach, but I definitely am a very social person and do very much love about my job how many new people you meet. And I find that actually to be one of the most stimulating parts of the whole thing and makes it worth all the, as ups and downs, right? And, rides along with the market. But, having the ability to have your own time to yourself, right, when you want it, and to be able to have that kind of control over your life and meet so many new people along the way is really just such a treat. I feel really lucky to have that in my career. And I think it's really manifests itself in other phases of my life as well by giving me time to find balance.
Yeah, of course. And maybe we'll touch on that balance piece, in a moment. Let me ask you, I know that you went to business school. I don't know, was real estate your first career? Is
It
that your
was.
only career?
It
Okay,
is
so
my
that,
only career. Basically my only career. I did some, freelance writing for a few years. I made some money playing poker for a few years, and
oh,
that
that's
was
interesting.
that was fun. But no, we're not talking about major money. This is when I had no financial responsibilities. It was enough money to get by without anything like that. But yeah, I sort of stumbled into real estate when I was, with my now wife for the first time and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I knew it needed to be something, more sustainable and potentially lucrative than what I was doing, which was really not much of anything other than freelance work. And I stumbled into real estate just off of a Craigslist ad and went into a big company for an interview and got hired and quickly realized, two things: that this was a great field for me. I loved it, but also that I didn't want to work at a company like this. And they were more of the definition of what people think of when they hear brokers, right? Very sort of fast and, talking out of both sides of their mouth and just kind of sleazy overall, which I didn't like. So my uncle had a broker's license he wasn't using. He's an architect. So he said, why don't we just start up our own thing? So we did. And, we had like a little tiny office with no window to start, just me and one of my friends and him. And gradually I just learned and really took to it and took over the company in full a couple of years later and had that till 2015. And that was as I was just finishing business school. And I actually went to business school in order to build a network for my career. It wasn't to find a new career. It was, this is going to be a great opportunity to meet so many people who will be both friends and potential lifetime clients, because you're getting surrounded by people who have careers that are going to make them a lot of money. And I bet correctly, there really wouldn't be many residential brokers going to business school. And there weren't. I was the only one there. So it was sort of just a lifetime network. I actually have a business school dinner tonight that I built with that. And it was really great because I made so many it was a genuine life-changing event for me in so many ways, and one of the best decisions I've ever made, even though it was an unorthodox one to make at the time, because I really have only had one career in my adult life. And I knew I wasn't going there to try to find a new one. It was to try to sort of maximize my current one.
Yeah. And to shore up. I mean, there's so many concepts and so
Sure.
much to good grief. Yeah. And especially if you tend towards, that piece of, tend towards that. So let me ask you, so during that time when you kind of stumbled into Craigslist, kind of, you talked about it kind of exciting you, or there were things about real estate that you knew, certainly
Yeah.
things changing all the time. I mean, I know what it's like to live with that.
Yeah.
Who was a mentor back then that you could remember?
So this is an interesting, I didn't really have one because I just jumped from 2 months at this company that was a bunch of slime balls to basically learning on the go, because my uncle was a full-time architect. He just sort of did this as a, let's have some fun, but he wasn't a broker. He wasn't somebody I could look to as, we're very close. He's my closest uncle, but he's not somebody I could look to as a real estate mentor. I would say there were two people early on, actually. It's not fully true.
It doesn't have to be real estate related. When I say mentor,
they are, but a little more indirectly. So one of them was the first real estate attorney that I started to work with regularly. And I met on a deal I was doing, one of my earlier sales deals in 2007. And he was their attorney for the sale. He's clients of mine. And I really liked him. I thought he seemed really nice and friendly and knowledgeable. So I recommended him for another deal soon after that. And soon he became my lifetime go-to person until he retired in 2020, he retired. But he was my go-to attorney for 13 years. Mm-hmm. And he taught me so much about how to, his favorite lesson was always, don't put anything on paper that you wouldn't be happy to repeat to a judge, which is very funny. And of course, was never an actual risk for anything I did. Although, you think back, you're like, wow, I could have written something that didn't even occur to me could be viewed in that way. So, he basically just, taught me so many things about the real estate law side of things and about client service and about just how you deal with people sort of professionally but also warmly, right? And, you treat them like real human beings. And that, I think, is something that's always separated me in my field, is that I try to get to know the people first. And then from there, it's easier to help them on their voyage. So that's one of my mentors. And the other one was the director of real estate at a property management company that I sort of got my first big career break at. handling their rental portfolio exclusively for a while. And it was downtown Manhattan, like really cool loft apartments, like the types that you've probably seen on TV, right? Some of them were as big as like 3,500, 4,000 square feet. Lots of fun to work on this portfolio. But Kenny was his name. I didn't have a ton of experience at the time. And he sort of saw something in me and trusted me to give me more and more responsibility with this, even though the initial introduction was through somebody who had long since been fired. And, there was nothing binding me to them. He just saw something in me. He's like, yeah, this is somebody I want. And we've stayed in touch to this day. That portfolio was sold back in 2012. So I haven't worked on it in obviously 13 years now. But Kenny and I have stayed in close touch. He came over for dinner last year. And he's the other person I would say really helped guide me on a path of how to do things. He was super smart and creative, and tough when he needed to be, but also like a people person and looking to get things, done kindly and amicably, But more than in both of these cases, though, it was people who really trusted me and saw something that maybe was beyond what my actual experience should have warranted at the time. And you need that. You need that when you're starting out in a career like this. And so both of those people were the ones I would say were the people that really were mentors. And then I hoped that my middle range version of my journey, when I went to Warburg for a few years, the head of that company was someone that I really hoped would fill that role too. But it just didn't work out, long term, unfortunately. But, no hard feelings or anything like that. Just, that's why I mentioned the first two. They're the ones who have stuck with me my whole career adult life.
Well, it's interesting. So often when I'm speaking with people and they're sharing about mentors, they bring up qualities, and it's so true, as you know, that you can't often see a quality in someone else unless you really admire it for
I think that's
yourself or
right.
find it in yourself. So the things that you talked about, which were smart, creative, tough, professional, warm, I suspect all of those things you hope others are saying about you. And I suspect
Yeah,
they may be
totally.
true about
Probably
you.
less tough. I'm not that tough. But no, when I absolutely have to be. But it's not my nature. I'm much more of someone who tries to make things work out without having to get into any kind of argument and then only lead to arguing or, is really a last resort for me to sort of get into any kind of mood in any way or
Well,
even
tough has to
remotely
be
aggressive.
arguing, but I
It
hear what you're
doesn't.
saying.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't. It doesn't. You're right. I mean, if we're talking about tough in a more nuanced way, then yes, firm and, really clear, right? Then yes, absolutely. I do that. And there are times I make it clear, look, if you want to get a deal done, you have to do it like this. And these lessons wind up transferring to personal life too, right? Like you learn so much when you learn these lessons that you can take home with you.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too. We so often are try to separate, professional and personal. Remember the days when your social media was supposed to be like a professional social media and a
And
personal
it's a
social media.
separate one, right?
And then
You're
at some
right.
point we're like, "Ugh, who's looking at the professional one? They're looking at the personal
Exactly.
one, so clean it up and have it be whatever." But I think that everything does translate, and hopefully, the way that we treat our clients is the same way that we would treat our loved ones, or vice versa, that there is respect and kindness. And when you say something, when you commit to something, you follow through on it. That's a big
Yep.
one. I think for those of us that are successful in real estate for reasons, a little bit beyond the
Yep.
pocketbook, it's about assisting someone in one of the largest financial transactions that they'll ever
100%.
experience in their lives.
Exactly. I love that. I love that about it. It's so nice you see it that way too, because I always think about it that way. And it's why, in some ways, I find it even more fun to work with buyers than sellers because you're seeing that part of the journey, whether it's a first purchase or maybe a second one to start moving up the family size, right? There's something super meaningful. And that's true on the sell side too, of course, right? People are moving on to their next chapter. But there's something about the first time buy in particular that,
Oh gosh,
even
yeah, the first time, yeah.
the first time, 2 decades in is
There's
still
nothing
as
like
exciting
that.
as the beginning.
It's good to have those once in a while because then you go, oh, that's right. That's
Yeah,
why it
totally.
wasn't
They're fun.
double-ending
I
that
have a
one
couple
day.
now, and they're great. It's so nice to see how excited the buyers are as they get closer and
Yeah.
closer to being a reality.
I think, and we'll get off real estate for a second, but I think the
Yeah,
worst
yeah.
part of it is thinking you can't believe what they're paying for that place right now
Right.
compared to
Yes.
what
Well,
it would
that
have been
happens
5 or 6
plenty.
years ago. You want to cry.
Let me tell you, especially early in my career working in New York, seeing, the amount of money that people were getting into bidding wars over, it's just, you realize all of a sudden how much more money's out there than you ever thought prior. Wild.
And cash, cash.
And cash too.
Yeah. So let me ask you, switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about challenges. Can you share, take a moment to think about a challenge that you've really faced and how you've kind of addressed, how that's shaped, your resilience and, your ability to do your job today, your determination in pursuing your goals. Because I'd love to really touch on people's challenges as well.
Sure. Well, I can give you, it is a work related story, but it's probably the best example of one that I can think of that really served as a turning point for me. And I sort of had a moment. It actually ties into why I went to business school. So I stumbled completely randomly online into a very wealthy buyer. This was early in my career still. Like was really mostly doing rentals. I'd done a few sales, but I was still really learning and candidly had no business having a buyer like this. But like these other people I mentioned, she saw something in me and, gave me a chance to work with her. And I just didn't have I hadn't figured out my ADHD fully yet at that time. But I wasn't good enough at my job yet, candidly, to handle a buyer like her who had really high requirements, as she should, given what her net worth apparently was. And it reached a point where she basically was like, basically candidly said, I really wanted this to work, but I just can't. Like, you're just not ready. And I remember we were on a corner at an apartment and she went away. And I remember standing in front of that building and I was like, all right, I have, two choices here, right? I can say, you know what, I'm never going to be that great. Like, this is just who I am as a broker. I'll be, a fine broker. And I was like, or I can recognize that this is a challenge from somebody who clearly saw something more there. And I can try to figure out how to take the next step in my career. And at that moment, I decided I was going to go to business school. And the reason that came into my mind was, yeah, building the network I was mentioning, but also I thought, I will learn, I'll be a real estate focus. I will learn all these things about development, right? And some stuff about private equity and things about the real estate industry that most real estate residential brokers don't know, right? Putting together pro formas for developments and things like that would help differentiate me and give me a deeper, broader knowledge base. I'd learn a little more about the professions that a lot of people I work with have, right? Like in finance, which, that part didn't work out that well. It just did not stick. I would have been terrible in finance. But it was nice to see, obviously I've met tons of friends from there who are in finance, and then on top of it all, I have gotten a lot of clients out of it, and they come more and more every year. I'm working with multiple ones right now from business school. And I've made so many close friends from there. Like, it was such a great decision for me. It taught me so much. And mostly it taught me about myself that I could take a punch. Another example was earlier in my career. And, I mentioned these because candidly, I didn't really start learning major lessons until I got into this industry. I was lucky enough to have some parental support before that. And, when I got into the industry, all of a sudden it's like, all right, now I'm on my own, right? And I'm fighting to build a career here, without a mentor. And early on, I had a potentially very large deal for the time, like would have been like 6 times as big as anything I'd done, and really life-changing money for us at the time, fall apart last second. And I remember at the same moment feeling like, well, I can, cry, or I can be like, let's just get the next one. And I remember just moving on and not being upset about it the next day. And that has really helped shape me. And I try to have that shape me outside of work too, as, what, you just have to move on and let things go once they're done. And if they need, some self-reflection, they need self-reflection. If you need to work on yourself to get better at these things, you take those lessons, you move on from them, but you don't carry it with you or have an attitude of, well, look, let me guess, now this isn't going to go right either, right? Like that negative approach that can easily come when you have some bad breaks. Yeah. And so I really have tried, and it's gotten me through some challenging times, having that mentality of being like, look, it's going to even out. Eventually we know this. So those are 2 examples of big moments that really helped shape me. And, I often think about how my career and then life, because, so much of obviously what my career and my day to day has to do with it. My life would have been like if those 2 things hadn't happened and I hadn't gone to business school, or I had gotten really dejected and said, I'm not going to do this anymore after that deal fell apart. I wonder what my life would have looked like.
For sure. Well, I love that so much because both of those situations, one is the height of rejection,
Yeah.
right? Especially when you're like in a little bit over your head. And
Yeah.
who of us has not been, I don't know. I mean, I've
100%.
certainly been in jobs where I was like way over
Yeah.
my head. And I was eventually asked to move to a new opportunity. There's nothing like that feeling, right?
No.
That, and also, having a deal right at the altar, right? And then
Yeah.
and having it fall apart, many people would have, if they hadn't walked away, they would have complained about it for a long time and they would have
Yeah.
pointed fingers. Well, she didn't even know, they would have done a lot of different things. So I have to dig in a little bit more. Did that just come from divine intervention, or did you have something Was there someone, some literature, some teacher, something that gave you the thought when you were at that crossroads that I'm
The
going to take?
business school one?
Well,
You
both
mean,
of them were taking a
oh,
higher path, right? So that's kind of, was it based in a
good question.
spiritual
Yeah.
alignment or, I don't know.
No, that's a great question. I've honestly never thought about it quite in that way before. The first one, I think honestly just fits my temperament. Really, I've come to learn that about myself is that I just don't tend to get too high or too low. Probably at times for worse, but overall, I do a good job of maintaining it and talking it out when I need to. Right? I don't mean I just keep everything inside of me, but I really do. But I talk it out so that it's not there anymore and weighs on me, so it really holds me down. I try not to do that. The second one, I had always sort of felt like I wasn't a great student in college. So I always sort of felt, and I didn't go into a field that had anything to do with what I went to college for. So I always did have this slight like thought of, boy, it would be kind of fun to go to school now, having a clear idea of what I want to do instead of just, it was great for the social parts of my growth, but it did very little for me outside of really helping me become a good writer, which is a big part of why I'm successful at real estate. But, I always kind of wanted to experience school again, but I had never really thought about what that might look like. I thought maybe I'll go into film school because that's a passion of mine, stuff like that. But then when this happened, I was like, you know what? This is telling me something different. Like I feel like business school would be great and there were just so many ways it sounded exciting to me in that moment. I wouldn't say I'd never thought about the idea of school again, but I don't really, as to the best of my memory, and I could be remembering incorrectly because it was a while ago. It started business school in 2012. So I decided to go in like 2010 or 11. I can't remember for sure, but I don't think there was anything that particularly triggered that moment. I think that moment was more of a genuine, like two things converging, right?
Yeah.
In the moment to say, here's what this should be. And I wouldn't call it divine intervention, but I would call it sort of just an alignment of a good idea and something that was going to be really good for me with a perfect fit for the moment that would make me feel good about taking advantage of an opportunity that was really lost, right?
And I would say, so consider that was divine.
Yes. And whatever that means to anybody, it was a divine
Yeah.
intervention. Agreed.
Yeah. Or divine intuition. I find as I age, there's a lot more of that.
Yes, there is.
And
tell me about it.
And truthfully, as I spend more time in silence, there is more of that, for me.
I will say that I find, we talked about the weather earlier and, that part of why I like warmer weather so much more now than when I was younger is being outdoors really does change my energy in a positive way that I don't think was necessarily as true when I was younger. I don't think I needed it in the same way, but now that and having a certain level of quiet, I live outside of the city now and, I'm in Brooklyn, but, out where it's a little quieter and, I like that now. I wouldn't have liked that 15 years ago. Yeah. But now it's great.
Yeah, don't those things change?
They really do.
I know that's for sure. So tell me, share a piece of advice that was maybe shared with you, whether from family of origin or as you were working through, I often think about, a lot of my inspiration has come quite honestly from some of my yoga teachers, from Tony Robbins, like I kind of pull from different areas. What's a piece of advice or kind of a quote that you hold dearly that's a North Star for you?
Yeah, I've never been a big motivational quote person personally. Not that I have anything against it. It just has never done much for me. I would say it's more the biggest lesson I think I've taken is don't take your good fortunes for granted, right? So if you have some elements of privilege, that allows you time or space to do things and discover things, or even to make mistakes that a lot of people don't get, be really grateful and aware of that and appreciative of it. And that's something that I don't think I realized until later in life than I wish had been the case. But I feel really happy that I know it now and can look at myself that way and, hopefully help my kid think about things that way. And, that to me has been maybe the most glaring thing I could say has changed in my perspective from, my 20s and early 30s to, gradually up to now.
Yeah, so appreciation, gratitude for all of the gifts that are around. I mean, so true, so true. And I think that has such a potential to absolutely change everything, for sure, to shift everything.
I think so too.
Yeah. So this has been such a thrill. I do have one last question that I love to always throw out to my guests.
Fire away.
Yeah, and I hope that you will, take a moment to think if you will. But what is the best, most uplifting compliment you've ever received, and why was it so impactful for you?
That's a great question. Oh, I don't know what I would say was like the specifically greatest compliment. I'm not great at taking compliments, so I probably blocked a lot of them out. I would say that, you know, the recognition on my wife's part about sort of how good I am at self reflection and being able to learn from my mistakes was a really big turning point in my life because I didn't necessarily know that about myself at the time. And basically, she was like, "Yeah, you can absolutely do these things, that need to happen if we're going to work, and you should want to do them." And I thought, and I was like, and for like a night, and it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I did. And since then, I've been just really good at looking at myself and taking ownership of my mistakes. And I think that's just so important for people to do. And you feel better when you do it. And it's hard. And, listen, we make mistakes every day, right? I carry mine very heavily sometimes, but, we still have to move on. And when you can sort of, acknowledge that, it's incredibly helpful, I think, for our journeys.
I just love that. And it's helpful for everyone around us, but the fact that
Yes.
it came to you in the context of a compliment, or you're sharing it as a compliment, that it really affirmed that practice. Because I
Yeah.
think without self-exploration and self-analysis, we are just reacting to everything in our environment all the time. And that's just, I see people like that all the time, and I just feel so fortunate that I'm not in that place.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's not a nice way to live. But I love the fact that you phrase that as a compliment, and especially from your partner. So
Yeah,
that
I
was
think
beautiful.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my
This has
pleasure.
been
Thank you, Gabe.
such
It
a
was so nice.
treat.
Yeah, it was so nice to get to know you. I just love this little drip of I don't know what, of hopefully inspiration and uplifting others. And that's why we're calling
And
it.
it's a really nice idea for a podcast. I think it's great that you use our field and go through people in our field from different places to get out a positive unifying energy. That's, I think, great.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you again for having me.
My pleasure.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on another amazing episode of Lifting Others as We Rise. I hope you make sure to follow through on today's Catalyst for Change. If you enjoyed today's insights, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You know your feedback really does matter. Stay connected for more uplifting conversations, because remember, when we lift others up, we all rise together. So until the next episode, keep the positivity flowing and keep lifting up others around you. This is Lisa Parenteau signing off from Lifting Others as We Rise. Take good care. Thank you so much for joining us today on another amazing episode of Lifting Others as We Rise. I hope you really enjoyed it, and that you'll calendar some time to think about some of the catalysts for change that I think Gabe brought up. And one of them was definitely, so amazing that when you're at a crossroads, he had that very wealthy client, high net worth client, who gave him a shot, saw something in him, which he mentioned a few times, but then finally turned and said, you know what? You're just not ready. And many people would have thrown everything out the window at that moment. But what he did was say, well, who do I need to be in order to have served that client? And made the decision to go to business school, which ended up being an amazing decision. He actually said, thought it was one of the best decisions that he ever made. That he did it partially to grow his sphere of influence, for clients, and to learn, but also to learn more and to be able to position himself as more of an expert. So I just thought that was really great. And then at the end, when he talked about self-examination, that was one of the best compliments that he ever got. That's amazing. Self-examination is not easy, and willingness to self-examine, and actually an openness, a vulnerability to shift, I think is really amazing as well. So Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback really does matter. Until the next episode, keep the positivity flowing. And remember, when we make an effort to lift others with intention, we all rise together. This is Lisa Parenteau signing off from Lifting Others as We Rise. Take good care.